Mafia boss falls for shy waitress who speaks Italian. Fluently, the neon sign of La Strada Nova flickered, casting a weak red and green glow over the wet pavement of Port Leon, New Jersey. The name meant the new road, a grand promise for a diner that smelled perpetually of old garlic and stale beer. It was just after 10 p.m., and this was Celia Ward's sanctuary. She preferred the late shift. The clientele changed after 9:30, thinning out from loud families and commuting businessmen to the quiet ghosts of the Harbor City third-shift dockworkers, tired nurses, and the occasional lost tourist who realized too late that La Strada Nova was just a greasy spoon with delusions of grandeur. Fewer customers meant fewer interactions, less forced smiling. Celia was good at blending into the worn linoleum pattern, while polishing cutlery, a task she stretched out to avoid the floor. She pulled a small, worn notebook from her apron pocket. She uncapped a pen and wrote carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. Avere il dente avvelenato. To have a poisoned tooth, it meant to bear a grudge. She whispered the phrase quietly, testing the smooth Florentine roll of the R. Celia Ward spoke fluent Italian for a reason that broke her heart daily. Her mother, Dr. Elise Ward, had not always been the frail figure lying in the St. Aurelia Care Pavilion. Elise had been a voice, a brilliant interpreter who moved between Italian and English for international diplomats. Now, a chronic heart condition kept her tethered to machines in a private medical center. The name, St. Aurelia, sounded like salvation. The bills, however, felt like damnation. Celia took every shift she could, fighting a war of attrition against invoices that arrived like clockwork. The Italian notebook was more than a hobby. It was an anchor, a way to hold on to the strong, vibrant mother she was desperately working to save. Her background made her wary. Growing up working class in the shadow of Port Leon's wealth, she felt an ingrained inferiority. She particularly avoided men who wore their money like armor and looked at waitresses like items on a menu. The rich and the dangerous, in her experience, were often the same thing. Ward, everyone, front and center. Now, Klein, the night manager, emerged from the back office, already sweating through his polyester tie. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting toward the front door. "Listen up, crew," Klein said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We have a VIP reservation, extremely VIP. They called 30 minutes ago. They want the mezzanine." A nervous energy rippled through the other two waitresses and the bartender. "The rules are simple," Klein continued, jabbing a finger. "You stick to the script. You take the order. You do not make small talk. You do not ask for autographs, and God help me, if I see one cell phone out for a picture, you are fired before they pay the check. Do you understand these are not people you disappoint?" The moment he walked away, the whispering started. "It's Lucchese," whispered Rosa. "The bartender. Has to be. He's the only one who books the mezz on no notice." The name hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Dario Lucchese. Even Celia, who tried to know nothing, knew that name. He was the king of Port Leon's waterfront. The Lucchese Maritime Consortium owned fleets of cargo ships, logistics hubs, and, according to the whispers, the politicians and the Port Authority, his business was legitimate on paper, but the real stories were told in hushed tones, stories of rivals vanishing and cargo that never made it to customs. Celia's stomach tightened. She immediately planned her retreat. She would busy herself behind the bar, polishing glasses, restocking olives. She would not be the one sent upstairs. She despised that kind of power, the kind that made managers sweat and waitresses feel like disposable objects. She glanced at the clock. 4 more hours. 4 hours until she could clock out, wrap up the leftover lasagna that Klein let the staff take home, and begin the long ride home. Her mind traced the route, the number 42 bus, the smell of diesel, the rattling windows as it passed through the Harborview district. The bus was usually empty at 2 a.m., save for her and the darkness, a stark contrast to the world of VIPs in expensive suits, later, during a lull. She went to the staff changing room in the basement. The single fluorescent bulb buzzed, humming a nervous tune. Celia looked at herself in the cracked mirror. She saw a face designed to be forgotten. Brown hair pulled back so tightly it hurt, a cheap, starchy uniform that did nothing for her figure. She was invisible. She leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. "Just be an invisible waitress," she whispered to her reflection. "That's safe." Outside, on the street, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The flickering red of the neon sign reflected off impossibly black paint. A procession of dark SUVs, silent as sharks, slid to a stop in front of La Strada Nova. Doors opened in unison, and men in tailored suits stepped out, their presence sucking the air out of the humid night. A different world had just arrived at the door. Celia's plan for invisibility evaporated in an instant. Just as she was wiping down the espresso machine, Klein burst from the kitchen, his face a pale, clammy gray. "Maria just threw up the entire staff meal. Food poisoning," he hissed, frantic. "She's the only one who speaks their language. You speak Italian, right? Your employee file. You wrote fluent." Celia's heart dropped. "It is just for personal use. Mr. Klein, I am not a professional." "I do not care if you are the Pope," Klein snapped, grabbing her arm and pulling her from behind the bar. "They are up on the mezzanine. They asked for someone to explain the specials in Italian. You are going up there. You are going to smile, and you are going to translate the difference between gnocchi and ravioli. I am not losing this account over a foodborne incident. Go. Now." The fear of losing the shift, of losing even one night's pay, was stronger than her fear of the men. Barely. She straightened her apron, her hands trembling, and took the silver water pitcher from Klein. The mezzanine was a small, elevated section overlooking the main diner, shrouded in velvet curtains for privacy. The air was thick with expensive cigar smoke and the low rumble of male voices. As Celia pushed through the small, swinging door, the conversation stopped. 4 men sat at the table. One was clearly the bodyguard, Leo Flint Marzetti, a mountain of a man in a tight suit, his eyes flat and watchful. He sat slightly back from the table, at the head, exuding a stillness that was more intimidating than any movement. Was Dario Lucchesi. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with a sharp, custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than her mother's hospital bills for the entire year. His eyes were dark and appraised her with a bored, dismissive glance. The other 2 men were different. They were louder, dressed in flashy linen suits despite the New Jersey chill, dripping with gold. They were the partners from Florida. Celia stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Acqua, signori still or sparkling?" Dario simply nodded toward the glasses. As Celia moved around the table, her hands shaking so badly she feared she would drop the pitcher. The 2 Florida men resumed their conversation. They switched to Italian, clearly believing the American waitress would not understand a word. But it was not the clean, academic Italian her mother had taught her. This was a thick, southern dialect, laced with the rough slang of the Neapolitan underworld. "He looks relaxed." The first man, the one with the heavy gold chain, murmured, gesturing with his chin at Dario. "He has no idea what is coming." Celia's hand paused over a glass. "Just make sure he takes the gift." The second man replied, tapping his fork. "The Albanera crew pays double if we deliver the location pin tonight. This cologne from Napoli will sing to them the second he opens it." Celia felt the blood drain from her face. A tracking device. They were planning to sell Dario Lucchesi's location to a rival gang, the Albanera crew. She knew that name from the frantic whispers at the bus stop. They were the new, violent players trying to seize the port. She was trapped. If she said nothing, she was safe. She could walk away, finish her shift, and forget this night. But if she spoke, she was involving herself in their world. She thought of her mother, alone in the hospital. Safety, invisibility. She reached Dario's glass. The 2 men were laughing now, confident in their deception. Dario watched her, his expression unreadable. She made the choice, leaning in, as if to ask a question about the water. Celia kept her eyes down. Her voice was low, fast, and the purest, most educated Florentine Italian. "Signor Lucchesi, mi perdoni." she whispered, her voice not shaking for the first time. Stanno mettendo un tracciatore in un regalo, una scimmizia. They're putting a tracker in a gift, a bug. Then, without missing a beat, she lifted her head slightly, gestured to the menu, and switched to accented English for the benefit of the table. And our special tonight, sir, is the osso buco, which is a braised veal shank. It is very tender. The shift in the air was immediate. The two Florida men had not understood her Italian, but Dario Lucchesi had, his eyes, once bored, snapped into sharp focus. He looked at her, truly looked at her. For one long second, he saw not a waitress, but a voice. He noted the perfect, academic pronunciation, so different from the street Italian he was used to. A slow smile spread across his face, but it did not reach his eyes. He laughed, a deep, rich sound, and replied in Italian, clapping one of the Florida men on the back, "Amici miei." "You are right. The service here is wonderful." He turned to the men. "She reminds me so much of my grandmother, always worrying about the food." The Florida men relaxed, laughing with him, oblivious. Dario turned his attention to the second man, and a gift from Napoli. "You are too kind, but a gift this special. I cannot accept it here." He nodded to Flint. "Leo, please take this package from our friends. Have it sent through our private security check at the office. We must be careful with such valuable perfume." Flint, his face a mask of stone, rose and collected the small, ornate box from the stunned Florida partner, who could not refuse without revealing himself. The trap had been disarmed, and the trappers did not even know they had failed. The rest of the dinner was a tense blur. Celia took their orders in English, her body running on pure adrenaline. When the men finally left, Dario pausing only to give her another assessing, silent look. Celia felt weak with relief. She was halfway to the locker room when Flint stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. "Mr. Lucchesi would like a word," he said. It was not a request. He led her not to the mezzanine, but outside to the alley, where one of the black SUVs sat idling, its engine a low purr. Dario Lucchesi stood by the open rear door, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the damp night air. He looked at her, and this time, there was no boredom. There was only sharp, calculating intensity. "Grazie," he said quietly, in Italian, "thank you." That was a dangerous piece of information. Where did a waitress at La Strada Nova learn to speak like a Florentine scholar? Celia pulled her thin cardigan tighter. She told him the truth. "My mother, she was an interpreter. She is very sick. At the St. Aurelia Pavilion, the bills are... I need the shifts." Dario took a long drag from his cigarette, his eyes scanning her face, searching for lies and finding none. He looked at her worn-out shoes, the cheap uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes. He said nothing more, just nodded once. A sharp, decisive movement. He got into the SUV, and the door closed with a heavy, final thud. Celia ran back inside, her heart pounding. 10 minutes later, Klein found her. He was beaming, a sight more disturbing than his panic. In his hand, he held a stack of $100 bills. "I do not know what you said to him, Ward," Klein said, peeling off 5 of the bills and handing them to her. "But this is your cut. The tip was astronomical." He paused, holding the rest of the cash. "He also left a message for you. He said, 'Tell the girl who listens that I will be in touch.'" Celia looked at the money in her hand, and a new kind of cold fear, colder than the New Jersey night, washed over her. He would be in touch. How she had never given him her number. She'd never even given him her name. The call from the Lucchesi Consortium came at 8 in the morning, just as Celia was leaving the billing office at the St. Aurelia Care Pavilion. She had just handed over nearly all of Dario's tip money as a stopgap payment on her mother's catastrophic bill, a gesture that felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. She was told a car would be waiting. It was a black sedan, immaculate and severe, sat at the hospital's main entrance. Looking alien against the backdrop of ambulances and visitor minivans, the driver, a man with the build of a walk-in freezer, simply opened the rear door for her. He did not use her name. They drove to the industrial heart of Port Leon, a place she only ever saw from the windows of the number 42 bus. The Lucchese Freight Hub was a massive, bleak complex of warehouses and steel fencing, capped by an imposing office building. The sign was deliberately boring. Pure corporate camouflage, the men guarding the gate, however, were not corporate. They wore tactical gear beneath their windbreakers and carried themselves like soldiers, not security. She was led to a silent elevator, then down a hall, and finally into an office that seemed to hang suspended in the air. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking, sovereign view of the entire container port. Cranes moved like giant, obedient animals, and ships waded in the gray water. Dario Lucchese was not behind the enormous mahogany desk. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching his kingdom. He turned as she entered, and the casual disinterest from the restaurant was gone. His eyes were sharp, focused, and held an unnerving stillness. "You saved me from a trace last night," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that filled the room. He spoke English, not Italian. "That is problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that they thought they could use Italian against me in my own city. It means someone in my organization is leaking what I say." He moved to his desk but did not sit. He leaned against it, a casual posture that seemed anything but relaxed. "I need an interpreter," he stated. "Someone unknown. Someone who hears everything and says nothing. Someone like you." Celia's hands were clammy. She thought of her mother, of the antiseptic smell of the ward. "I am a waitress," she said, her voice small but clear. I can translate for you, but only translation per session, enough to pay for my mother's medical bills. I will not be involved in anything illegal." A slow smile touched the corner of Dario's mouth. It was not a smile of amusement, but of recognition. He knew that line. He knew how easily it would be erased. "My business, Miss Ward, is logistics," he said smoothly. Walking back to the window, he motioned her closer. She stayed put, but her eyes followed his gesture to the massive cargo ships below. "I move goods, the Albanera crew, the ones who sent those fools last night. They want to move different goods. People, narcotics. That kind of cargo brings a different kind of attention, a kind that is bad for everyone's business." He turned to face her fully. "I'm keeping this port clean. I'm keeping it stable. You help me do that. You are not just helping me, you are helping the entire city." It was a masterful performance, painting him as the necessary, reasonable alternative to true evil. "As for your mother," he continued, "St. Aurelia is expensive." He paused, letting the weight of her problem settle back onto her shoulders. "I have a foundation. The Port Leon Cultural and Maritime Foundation. It sponsors academic translation work. It would be perfectly legal, perfectly clean, for the foundation to cover the costs of its employees' families, a full grant for your mother's total care." Celia felt a dizzying rush of relief, followed immediately by a sharp, cold spike of fear. The offer was a lifeline, a miracle. It was also a cage. How did you know the specifics of her bill?" "I like to know the people I am in business with," he said, dismissing the question as trivial. "We are in business, are we not?" She had been investigated. He knew her one single vulnerability. He knew the exact price of her cooperation. She had no choice. She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. Good. The warmth, if it had ever been there, vanished. "We start now." He pressed a button on his desk. "Leo, bring the tablet." Flint entered, placing a secure video tablet on the desk. Dario initiated a call. A second later, the faces of 2 older, well-dressed Italian men appeared. They were in an opulent room, sunlight streaming behind them. "Signor Lucchese c'è piacere," one of them boomed. They spoke a rapid Adriatic dialect, and for the next 20 minutes they argued forcefully about a proposed 10% hike in shipping tariffs, using dense maritime jargon and obscure regional idioms. They believed they were talking circles around the American-born boss. Dario just watched Celia. She stood straight, her mind locking into the familiar rhythm of her mother's work. She listened, her brow furrowed, and then, in flawless, formal Italian. She began to speak. She did not just translate their words, she dissected their argument. "Signor Moretti," she said, her voice firm, "you are referencing the Adriatic Accord of 1995, but you are omitting the codicil regarding fuel surcharges. Mr. Lucchese's current rate is, in fact, generous." The men on the screen stopped smiling. Celia had not only understood them, she had corrected them, saving Dario a fortune and, more importantly, saving him face. When the call ended, Dario stared at her for a long, silent moment. "You are not a waitress," he said. "Not as a question, but as a statement. You are a weapon, and you are mine." Flint escorted her back to the elevator. As the doors opened, he put a hand on her arm, stopping her. His voice was gravel, a stark contrast to Dario's silk. "Mr. Lucchese does not like to owe anyone," Flint said, his eyes as flat as the harbor water. "If he owes you, it means you are important. Important people around here. They either get protected or they get buried. Just remember which side you are on." That night, Celia sat by her mother's bedside at St. Aurelia. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. Doctor. Elise Ward slept peacefully, unaware that her fate had just been traded in a glass office overlooking the sea. Celia watched her, the new, heavy reality pressing down on her. "It is just temporary," she whispered to the sleeping woman. "Just until you are better. I am in control." But as she clutched the small Italian notebook in her pocket, she knew, deep down, that she had just stepped off a safe shore and into a deep, fast-moving current. And the man in the glass tower was the one directing the tide. The second assignment came 2 days later. This time, the black sedan did not take her to the glass tower. It drove her deep into the restricted container yard, right onto the wet, steel docks. Flint escorted her up the gangplank of a cargo ship, the Regina del Mare, which sat hulking and dark in the harbor. The air smelled of salt, rust, and diesel. They met in the captain's private lounge, a room paneled in dark wood that felt completely at odds with the industrial vessel. Dario was there, along with 2 of his senior men. A secure satellite-linked video screen was set up on the chart table. "This is about Pier 7, Dario told her, his voice low. "The lease is contested. The men we are speaking to in Ancona control the European side of the route. They are old school. Do not just translate what they say. Translate what they mean." The call connected. 2 elderly men appeared, their faces heavily lined, their suits immaculate. The conversation began, a polite but tense negotiation over docking fees and priority scheduling. Celia translated flawlessly, her mind a sharp, clear conduit. Then, the older of the 2 men, Signor Vianello, made a strange comment. After Dario made a particularly firm offer, Vianello smiled thinly and said, "A reasonable offer, but one must always check the corners of the room. Non si sa mai chi ascolta quando, I muri sono nuovi." You never know who is listening when the walls are new. It was an obscure, old proverb. It was not a yes. It was a warning. Celia's blood ran cold. Her mother had used that exact phrase to describe diplomatic meetings where they suspected bugs. "Mr. Lucchese," Celia interrupted, her voice urgent but steady. "He's not talking about the offer. He's telling you someone is listening in, when the walls are new. He means this connection. He thinks this line is compromised." Dario's eyes locked on hers. He did not hesitate. "Leo, taglia la connessione, adesso. Kill the connection." Now Flint hit a switch and the screen went black. A heavy silence filled the room. Dario turned to one of his men. "Run the diagnostic. Full sweep. Find the parasitic draw." The man, a technical expert, pulled out a handheld device. He worked for 2 agonizing minutes before his face went pale. "Boss, she was right. There is a secondary output. It is not external. It is routing from inside our own server hub. Someone on our end is feeding the signal." The implication was suffocating. The leak was not in Italy. It was in Port Leon. Dario's calculated calm was more terrifying than rage. "Gabriele Costa," Dario said, the name sounding like an accusation. "The Alba Nera crew. They are impatient. They do not want to build. They only want to take." He knew. instantly. Who was behind this? A new generation, a new kind of violence. The meeting was over. Flint drove Celia back, not to her apartment, but to the St. Aurelia Pavilion for her evening visit with her mother. As she stepped out of the sedan and it pulled away, a man stepped out from the shadow of the hospital's brick facade. He was the opposite of Dario's men. He wore a rumpled tan suit and a tired expression. "Celia Ward?" he asked. His voice was loud, too loud for the quiet evening, as if he wanted to be heard. "Agent Jonah Pike, Metropolitan Criminal Intelligence Service. We need to talk." He gestured with a laminated ID. "We just want to protect you. Kid, you are in deep water." Celia's throat tightened. "I do not know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," Pike said, his tone falsely sympathetic. "You are translating for Dario Lucchesi. We've been building a case on the Lucchesi Consortium for 3 years. He's not a good man." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We know about your mother, Dr. Elise Ward, room 412, chronic cardiomyopathy. The bills are impressive." Celia felt sick. She was a pawn, and everyone knew the exact square she was on. "Here is the deal," Pike said, getting to the point. "You are our new source. You go to the meetings, you wear a wire, you tell us what you hear. In exchange, the MCIS discretionary fund takes care of everything. All of it. The St. Aurelia bills, the long-term care, medication. We can move her to the best heart center in the country. A full ride guarantee." It was the same offer. The exact same offer. From the other side of the law, a clean one. A lifeline, but a different kind of cage. I have to think," Celia stammered, backing away. "Do not think too long," Pike called after her, his friendly mask gone. "You are a witness now. You are either with us or you are an accomplice." The pressure was suffocating. She sat with her mother for an hour, pretending to read, her mind racing, when she left the hospital. A different Lucchesi car was waiting, a new summons. This time, it was to a small satellite office, a mini warehouse near the railroad tracks, used for dispatching local truck routes. Dario was there, Flint and the tech expert from the ship. They were arguing in low, angry Italian over a set of blueprints. It had to be an inside job, Dario was saying, jabbing a finger at the schematic. And then the world exploded. The sound was a deafening roar as the reinforced glass of the office windows blew inward. Celia screamed, throwing her arms over her head as a spray of metal and glass peppered the room. Alarms blared, a cacophony of sirens. Outside, the distinct, terrifying sound of automatic gunfire echoed between the metal buildings, punctuated by men shouting in the harsh, guttural dialect of the Alba Nera. Dario did not flinch. In one smooth, violent motion, he grabbed Celia by the arm, yanking her off her feet and shoving her through a side door and into a small, concrete-walled safe room, slamming the steel door shut behind them. The tiny room was dark, lit only by the red emergency light on a radio console. Celia was trembling, her ears ringing. She could feel the vibrations of the attack through the concrete floor. Dario was completely calm. He picked up the radio handset, his other hand pressing a button on the wall that sealed the door. He began issuing commands in rapid, clipped Italian. He was not shouting. His voice was a blade, cold and precise, directing his men, cutting off escape routes, repositioning his guards. He was a general in a war she had not known she was standing in, and as she watched him, his face illuminated in the hellish red light, his absolute control in the center of lethal chaos. She felt something terrifyingly new. She was afraid, more afraid than she had ever been in her life, and in a way that made her feel ashamed. She was captivated. The gunfire subsided, replaced by the sound of approaching sirens. Dario finished his commands and hung up the radio. The silence in the small room was deafening. He turned to look at her, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. "Someone sold them my schedule," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They knew I would be at this location tonight." He took a step closer. She could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and the acrid cordite from the attack. "They knew the ship's location 2 nights ago, and they knew my location tonight," he continued, And right now, Celia, you are the only new person who knew both. He was still protecting her. He had thrown her into the safe room first, but the words hung between them, a new, sharp line drawn. She was not just his translator. She was now his primary suspect. Flint drove with the lights off, weaving through a maze of industrial back alleys, the sirens fading behind them. Dario's main penthouse, a glass fortress in the sky, was the one place he could not go. It was the first place they would watch. They parked in a dark, unmarked garage beneath a building that looked abandoned. The ground floor was a defunct jazz club, the Blue Docklight, its neon sign dark, the windows boarded up. Dario led her through a service entrance, up a flight of narrow, creaking stairs, and into a sprawling loft apartment above the club. It was the complete opposite of his glass tower. The space was filled with old wood, worn leather furniture, and brick walls. It smelled of history, dust, and faintly of the jazz-era ghosts. "Sit," Dario ordered, gesturing to a sofa. He was moving stiffly. "There is an urgent call I must make to Ancona. I need you to confirm my instructions." He was all business, but the adrenaline from the attack was still thrumming through Celia's veins. As he shrugged off his tailored suit jacket, she saw him wince. A sharp, involuntary movement. He tossed the jacket, revealing the dark, wet stain spreading across the sleeve of his white shirt. "You are hit," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Dario glanced down at his bicep as if it were a mild annoyance. "E solo un graffio." Just a scratch. He began to unbutton his cufflink, his fingers clumsy. "It is bleeding," she insisted, rising from the sofa. The shock had made her bold. "You have to clean it." He stopped, watching her as she moved to the small kitchenette, found a dish towel and ran it under hot water. She returned to him. "There must be a first aid kit." He simply nodded toward a bathroom above the sink. When she came back with the red box, he was sitting on the edge of a heavy wooden table, his sleeve rolled up. It was not just a scratch. A bullet had grazed him, leaving an angry, bleeding trough in the muscle of his bicep. Celia's hands trembled. This was the man who had terrified her, the man who suspected her, the man who held her mother's life in his hands, and he was bleeding in front of her. "Hold still," she whispered, her voice shaky. She pressed the warm, damp cloth to the wound to clean it. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but did not move. She was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her senses were overwhelmed by the proximity, the scent of sandalwood she had noticed in the safe room, mixed with the faint, expensive smoke of his cigar, and now the metallic tang of his blood. As she worked, dabbing at the wound with an antiseptic wipe from the kit, she was acutely aware of his stillness, of the coiled power in the arm she was touching. He was watching her, his gaze intense. He was not looking at her hands, but at her face. He saw that the fear in her brown eyes, the fear he had seen at the restaurant, was gone. It had been replaced by something else, a focused, genuine, and deeply human concern. It unnerved him more than the attack. "There," she said, her voice quiet. She taped a square of gauze firmly over the wound. "It needs a doctor." "It will do," he said. His voice was rough. He made the call to Ancona, his Italian clipped and authoritative as he rerouted a shipment, his arm, his bicep, bandaged by her hand. Celia translated his commands, her own voice finding its steady, professional rhythm. When the call ended, they were left in the heavy silence of the loft, the distant sound of a lone saxophone drifting from somewhere in the neighborhood. The tension from the attack, the suspicion, and the new intimacy of her touch hung between them. "You saved me again tonight," Dario said, his voice low. He was not looking at her, but at the dark windows, on the ship, and in the office. "You are fast." It was a rare admission of weakness, a crack in the armor, exposed now that the adrenaline had faded. "I am just doing what you pay me for," she said, "gathering the bloody cloth." "No," he said, turning to her. "You are not." The vulnerability he had shown cracked something open in her. The fear of the past 2 days, the terror of the gunfire, the constant grinding ache of her mother's illness, all of it rose up. "I am terrified all the time." she confessed, the words tumbling out in a whisper. "I go to that hospital, and I have to smile. I have to pretend I am strong for my mother. But when I leave her room, when I am on that bus, I am so scared I cannot breathe. I am scared I will lose her. I am scared of this, of you." Dario watched her, his expression unreadable. He did not judge. He did not offer empty comfort. He just listened. When she finished, a heavy silence fell, heavier than before. He spoke, his voice soft, and in the Italian she loved, the language of her mother. "Chiunque possa prendersi cura di qualcuno più debole, non è debole." Anyone who can care for someone weaker is not weak themselves. The words spoken in that language, in his voice, undid her. He took a step toward her. He was close, but he made no move to grab her. He slowly, deliberately, lifted one hand and touched his fingers to her cheek. It was a question. Celia did not pull away. She leaned into the touch, a small, involuntary movement, closing her eyes for just a second. His other hand came up, cupping her face, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears she had not realized were falling. And then he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a boss or a gangster. It was not a kiss of possession. It began slowly, a soft, tentative exploration, testing her response. His hand slid from her cheek down her back, resting on the small of it, holding her near but not trapping her. She responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, their breath mingling. It was a kiss of shared shock, of adrenaline, of a desperate need for comfort in the center of the chaos. Her cheap cardigan, the one she always wore, slipped from her shoulder. Dario broke the kiss, but only to rest his forehead against hers. He was breathing heavily. He whispered, in Italian, his voice now a rough murmur against her skin. "La tua pronuncia, il modo in cui tremi." Your pronunciation, the way you tremble. He praised her language, her intelligence, her reaction, making the intimacy about her mind as much as her body. She melted against him, her fear finally giving way to a different, hotter emotion. They held each other, a silent, desperate embrace, a moment of safety found in the most dangerous place. He kissed her again, this time with the hunger of a man who had been starved, and she met his intensity, claiming her own safety. The narrative of the night shifted. The loft, a safe house from violence, became a sanctuary for a different kind of surrender. The bedroom door, left ajar, closed with a quiet click, a deliberate, soft punctuation. It was the night two people, from two impossibly different worlds, allowed themselves to belong to each other, not in violence, but in warm, whispered Italian and the comforting weight of touch. The next morning, the gray light of Port Leon filtered through the dusty windows. Dario stood at the window, dressed again in a fresh shirt from a hidden closet. He was the boss again, his shoulders set, his focus on the port below. But when Celia emerged, tying the belt of a silk robe he had left for her, his eyes found hers. The calculation was there, but it was different. It was no longer the look of a man assessing a tool. It was the look of a man who had made a choice. The morning after the blue docklight loft, the fragile intimacy they had shared was shattered by the cold light of reality. Celia was escorted back to her apartment by one of Dario's men, a silent acknowledgement that her old life was over. The first blow came not as a threat, but as a clinical, bureaucratic document. A certified letter was waiting, forwarded from St. Aurelia. It was from a state insurance oversight committee, citing a newly enforced clause. It was a copy of an official order, championed by the Metropolitan Criminal Intelligence Service, to suspend insurance payouts and aid to any patient at St. Aurelia Care Pavilion deemed to be associated with an ongoing federal investigation into organized crime. It was not an accusation. It was a scalpel. Agent Pike was cutting off her mother's lifeline, and he had signed his name to it. The second blow came an hour later, a call from Dario's driver. "Mr. Lucchese requires you at the hub." The tension at the Lucchese freight hub was thick enough to suffocate. Dario was in the main conference room, the glass-walled office from her first visit. He was not alone. Flint stood by the door. Two older men sat at the table, along with a younger, impeccably dressed man in a European-cut suit who looked more like a banker than a wharf manager. This was Lorenzo Belanti, Dario's cousin, the civilized face of the operation. "We have a rat," Dario said without preamble as Celia entered. His anger was a cold, controlled burn, his eyes fixed on the men at his table. He was hunting, and he was hunting inside his own family. He suspected Lorenzo, whose polished veneer and constant talk of modernizing, the business always seemed to clash with Dario's old-world code. But he had no proof. After the meeting, which resolved nothing, he dismissed the others, leaving only him and Celia in the glass tower, the port laid out below them like a map of his problems. She held out the letter from Pike, her hand trembling. "He sent this to the hospital." Dario read the document, his jaw tightening until the muscle bulged. He did not explode. The anger he showed was different now. It was protective. It was for her. He carefully placed the paper on his desk. "You are never to speak to this man, Pike, alone again," he said, his voice a low command. "You do not answer his calls. You do not meet him. If he finds you, you walk away. Do you understand me? Celia." "He thinks I am the leak. Does he not?" she whispered. "And you, last night, you thought I was, too." He turned to her, the anger replaced by something heavy, something close to regret. "I have to know. Tell me exactly what he said to you." She told him everything. About the first meeting at the hospital, the offer of a full ride for her mother, the wiretap, the pressure. "He wants to use me to get to you," she finished, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "He thinks I'm weak, and you have no reason to believe I am not working for him. I am the new girl, the one who was there for both attacks. I need to prove I am not his," she said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "The attack at the warehouse, the gunfire, the men shouting, I heard them. Did your men record anything, any audio from the docks?" Dario looked at Flint, who nodded once. "We have the security logs, audio from the perimeter mics." "Play it," Celia insisted. Flint produced a tablet. He tapped the screen, and the room filled with the chaotic sounds of the previous night gunfire, alarms, and overlaid, the panicked, angry shouts of the Albanera attackers. Celia listened intently, her head tilted, her brow furrowed. The men were shouting in a thick, brutal southern Italian dialect, and then she heard it. A man, his voice high with adrenaline, shouted to another, "Dobbiamo trovare la ragazza Costa la vuole la ragazza che traduce per lui." We have to find the girl Costa wants her. The girl who translates for him, Celia's hand flew to her mouth. "Stop. Play it again." Flint replayed the clip. "That is it," she said, looking at Dario. "They were looking for me. La ragazza che traduce per lui. They know about me. Gabriele Costa knows about me. This was not just an attack, it was an attempted kidnapping." The proof was absolute. She was not the leak. She was the target. Dario's face was a mask of cold fury. He picked up his phone and spoke 2 words. "Esegui il protocollo." Execute the protocol. This changed everything. It was one thing for the leak to be in his organization. It was another for his enemy to have identified and targeted the one person he had allowed himself to care for. "You cannot go back to your apartment," he said. "Flint will pack a bag for you. More importantly, your mother is not safe at St. Aurelia. Pike has made it a target. The Albanera will see her as leverage." "What are you doing?" she asked, as he began making a series of rapid calls. "The Port Leon Cultural and Maritime Foundation," he said, "is activating its Distinguished Scholar program. Your mother is being moved." This was not a simple car ride. Within 2 hours, a private ambulance, flanked by 2 of Dario's black sedans in a display of quiet. Overwhelming force. Transferred doctor. Elise Ward from the public hospital to a discreet, high-security, long-term care facility in the hills outside Port Leon. It was a place with no public name, funded entirely by Dario's foundation. It was a fortress. Celia watched from the window of the new facility as her mother was settled into a suite that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital room. She was deeper in his debt, deeper in his world than ever. But as she touched the reinforced glass, she felt an undeniable, complex truth. This was not possession. This was protection. It was protecting her mother from the law and from the streets at the same time. That night, in the glass office, Dario stood with Flint, watching the lights of the new Yin secure facility twinkle in the distant hills. "It is a risk, boss," Flint said, his voice a low rumble. "Moving her. It makes us look soft. It makes you look soft." Dario watched the light, his mind on the woman who could decipher a threat in an ancient proverb. "She makes me choose," Dario said, almost to himself. "She makes me choose what kind of criminal I am willing to be." He turned to Flint. "Keep the maritime lanes. Keep them clean. No narcotics, no trafficking. Costa can have the dirt. I am keeping the port. I will not have her name dragged into that." But the move, intended for safety, had the opposite effect. Agent Pike's surveillance team flagged the high-security ambulance transfer immediately. To the MCIS, it did not look like protection. It looked like a kingpin securing his assets, preparing to flee. Pike looked at the surveillance photos of the secure convoy. "He's running," Pike spat. "He's moving his people, getting ready to bolt. We are out of time. Move up the plan. We are going to wire her, and we are going to do it now." Celia was trapped. The vice had tightened. On one side, Pike, who would destroy her mother's care to get to Dario. On the other, Dario, the only man who could save her mother, but at the cost of her soul. The next move, she knew, would be the last. The air over the abandoned Port Leon Stadium parking lot was cold. Lorenzo Belanti, Dario's cousin, stood by his pristine Maserati, his expensive leather shoes a stark contrast to the cracked pavement and weeds. A black muscle car, the kind favored by the Alba Nera crew, rolled in and cut its engine. Gabriele Costa emerged. He was all brutalist angles and new money flash. "You have it." Costa's voice was a gravel road. As promised, Lorenzo said, his voice smooth as silk. He passed over a data file, the full shipping manifest for the next 2 weeks, and Pier 7's new security rotation. And Lucchese. Lorenzo smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. "He is compromised, distracted, do not? There is a new girl, a translator. La ragazza che traduce per lui. He has moved her mother. He's spending more time securing her than securing his own business. He's soft." "Good." Costa grinned. "Soft things break." To wash his hands of the transaction, Lorenzo needed a scapegoat. He knew Celia visited her mother every afternoon at 4 p.m. He found her in the sterile, quiet hallway of the new facility, speaking with one of the private nurses about Dr. Ward's medication. "Celia Cara," Lorenzo said, approaching with his practiced, disarming smile. "I came to check on the arrangements for your mother. Dario insists on the best." As he spoke, gesturing warmly, he accidentally brushed against her, his hand dipping into the canvas tote bag she always carried. It took less than a second. A single, high-capacity USB drive, loaded with warehouse maps and ship registries, nestled silently against her Italian notebook. When Celia arrived at the Lucchese freight hub an hour later, she was just an employee, but the security arch at the main entrance, a high-tech scanner that screened all personnel, went from green to a piercing, shrill red. Flint, who had been watching the security post, was on her in an instant. His face was unreadable. "Ma'am, you need to come with me. Now." He did not grab her, but his proximity was a command. He led her into a small, windowless security room. "Empty your bag, please." Celia's heart pounded. "What? Why, I do not understand." "Your bag, Celia." She emptied it. Her notebook, her wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, and a small, black USB drive she had never seen before in her life. Flint picked it up, his expression hardening. He plugged it into a terminal, the screen immediately populated with sensitive Lucchese data. He made one call. Dario arrived 3 minutes later, the warmth from the blue docklight loft. The man who had whispered Italian against her skin was gone. In his place was the boss. His face was stone. He looked at the drive, then at her. He did not shout. His voice was a quiet, lethal thing. made heavier by the intimacy it had once held. He asked her one question, in the language they now shared. "Mi hai tradido? You betrayed me." The question was a physical blow. "No," she gasped, tears welling. "Dario, no, I have never seen that before. I do not know how that had got in my bag." But the evidence was there, cold and digital, and in that precise, damning moment, her phone, which sat on the table with her wallet, lit up. A text message notification, visible to everyone in the room. It was from Agent Pike. "Thanks for the cooperation. The meat is set." Celia's blood ran cold. Pike, frustrated by her silence since the hospital, had just signed her death warrant. Dario saw the message. His eyes, which had held a flicker of desperate hope, went dead. He had given her his vulnerability, and she had brought the federal government to his door. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a deep, profound, and terrifying disappointment. He turned and walked out of the room. Celia was shattered. The accusation, the coldness in his eyes after he had held her, it broke something inside her. She was not just a suspect. She was a traitor in his eyes. Flint's voice was surprisingly gentle. "You should go." She ran. She ran from the hub, from the port, from the man she thought she was seeing. She was hurt. She was furious, and she was trapped. She did not go to her apartment. She took a cab straight to the MCIS downtown field office. She stormed past the front desk, demanding to see Agent Pike. He met her in a small, gray interrogation room, a smug look on his face. "Knew you would come around," he started. "Shut up," Celia snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this. You framed me. Now I want protection, witness protection." Pike leaned back, the smugness fading, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Okay, you are protected. Start talking. Give me Lucchese." "No," Celia said, her jaw set. "I will not. He is not the one I am here to talk about. I will give you Gabriele Costa. I will give you the Alba Nera crew. I will give you everything I heard, everything I know. But you do not touch Dario. That is the deal." Pike stared at her for a long moment, the gears turning. She was not a mole. She was in love with him, or something close to it, and that made her, in this moment, the most valuable and most dangerous asset he had. "Okay," Pike said slowly, leaning forward. "A new deal, a crazy one. We do not just get Costa. We use you to lure Costa. We set a trap, make him think you are on the run, that you are ready to sell out Dario to save yourself. We get Costa on tape, admitting to the attacks, to the smuggling. We dismantle the Alba Nera top to bottom. And in return," Celia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "In return," Pike said, "we get a major win. The brass is happy, and the Lucchese file, it gets heavy. It goes to the bottom of a very deep pile. We deprioritize his gray area shipping so long as he keeps the blood and the narcotics off the docks. We save him from Costa, and you save him from us." It was a suicidal plan. She would be the bait in a war between two mafia bosses and the federal government, but it was the only way. The only way to prove to Dario she was not a traitor, without becoming one. "I will do it," she said. Meanwhile, back in the glass tower, Dario sat in the dark. Flint entered, silent. "It is not her," Dario said. "Boss, the evidence." "Is too perfect," Dario interrupted, his voice rough. "The timing of the text message, the USB, it is a frame-up." He looked at Flint, his eyes full of a cold, calculating rage. "I want all the footage, not just the gate. I want the feed from the new facility. Every angle, from the moment she stepped on the property. Find him." Flint went to work, and there, on a secondary camera in a hallway, they saw it. Lorenzo Belanti, the warm smile, the casual, friendly bump, the hand, quick as a snake, slipping into her bag. Dario watched the footage, his hands clenching into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He had done the unforgivable. He had accused her. He had wounded the one person who had looked at him and not seen a monster. And now? He had no idea where she had run. Agent Pike's plan was to paint Celia as a fugitive. The MCIS leaked disinformation through a trusted channel. Celia Ward, having betrayed Lucchese, was now betraying the feds, and would be moved in a non-secure private ambulance from a side dock, disguised as a maternal transfer. Costa, they reasoned, would see her as a valuable, unprotected asset. Gabriele Costa took the bait, but he was not a fool. He had no intention of engaging in a public firefight at a secondary port. He had his own intel. He knew the location of the new high-security facility. He decided to cut the plan off at the source. The ambush happened in the sterile, concrete underground garage of the new care facility, just as two MCIS agents, dressed as orderlies, were moving Celia toward a staged, non-secure ambulance. Two black muscle cars screeched down the ramp, cutting them off. It was fast, brutal, and professional. The agents were disabled with tasers before they could even draw their weapons. Celia was grabbed, a thick hand clamped over her mouth, and she was hauled into the back of a car. They drove her to the old port, a decaying part of the city that even the harbor police avoided. They dragged her into the cavernous, freezing cold shell of Warehouse 14. It smelled of rust and dead water. Gabriele Costa was waiting, a smug, vicious smile on his face. He looked her up and down. "So, this is the girl who translates. You are worth more to me than him, Piccola." He ordered his men to tie her to a chair, then left to make a call. The two guards who remained spoke in the harsh Southern dialect she knew. They were nervous, eyeing her. Celia took a breath, forcing her voice to be calm, authoritative, and in their dialect, "Il signor Costa ha dato ordini precisi," she said sharply. "Mister, Costa gave specific orders." The guards froze. "Ha detto che sono il suo ospite," she continued, her voice layered with ice. "Ha detto di tenermi al sicuro. Se un solo capello è fuori posto, vi ammazza, voi e le vostre famiglie." He said, "I am his guest." He said to keep me safe. If a single hair is out of place, he kills you. You and your families. She was using their own command structure against them. They looked at each other, confused, but the ring of authority in her voice, in their own language, made them hesitate. They backed away, giving her a few feet of space. She had bought herself time. At the same moment, in the glass tower, Dario watched the pixelated, grainy video of Lorenzo planting the drive. His rage was not hot, it was a glacier, moving slow and destroying everything in its path. He had already seen the report of the abduction from the garage. His own men, watching the facility, had reported it. Seconds after Flint received a garbled audio file. He listened to the file Celia had sent from her burner phone. It was muffled, but the voices were clear. Costa, bragging to someone. Bought his cousin for a few points. "Lorenzo will give me the whole pier once she had sent him the proof. She had cleared her own name while she was a prisoner. Flint." Dario's voice was lethally quiet. "Get the team. The small one. No one else. We are not starting a war. We are ending one." The rain came down in sheets, turning the Port Leon docks into a slick, black mirror. Yellow industrial lights on the cranes cast long, distorted shadows over the rows of containers. Dario, Flint, and 4 other men, all dressed in black tactical gear, moved like ghosts. They used hand signals, their weapons suppressed, inside Warehouse 14. Costa was pacing, his arrogance palpable. He had Celia in the center of the room, her hands bound to a steel chair. He pulled out his phone, and now he grinned. "I think we make a call. I want to show your boss what his property looks like when it belongs to me." Just as his finger moved to dial, the main steel roll door of the warehouse did not open. It was ripped from its tracks by a targeted charge, exploding inward with a deafening screech of tortured metal. Dario stood in the opening, framed by the rain and the sickly yellow light. He was not a businessman. He was a hunter. Time stopped. His eyes found Celia. He saw the terror on her face, the raw marks on her wrists, but he also saw her spine. She was not crying. She was glaring at Costa, her head held high. Dario's breath caught in his __ chest, a fractional, fatal pause. His professional mask of control did not just slip. It was obliterated. This was not business. Costa recovered first, yanking a pistol from his waistband and firing wildly. "Kill him," he screamed to his men. The warehouse erupted. Flint's team fanned out, their suppressed weapons making quiet, deadly thumps against the loud, panicked barks of the Albanera's handguns. Dario did not take cover. He moved. A straight, violent line toward Costa, firing with a precise, cold anger. Flint and his men were a blur of motion, neutralizing Costa's soldiers. As two of the guards turned to flee, Celia, seeing her moment, used her only weapon. "Viha traditai," she screamed in the purest, loudest Italian she could muster. "Il vostro capo vi ha venduti. Ai federali ha venduto. Lorenzo siete soli." He betrayed you. Your boss sold you to the feds. He sold Lorenzo. You are alone. The guards skidded to a halt, the lie landing with the weight of truth. Their hesitation was all Flint needed. Dario slammed into Costa, tackling him to the concrete. The gun clattered away. It was no longer a gunfight, it was a brawl. Dario, his face a mask of primal fury, landed a brutal punch, then another, silencing the man who had touched her. "DS, boss," Flint yelled, grabbing his arm and hauling him off the half-conscious man. "We are out of time. Listen." Through the sound of the rain, a new sound emerged. Sirens, not local police, the high-low wail of federal vehicles. Pike was on his way. Coming to collect his prize, Flint sliced through Celia's ropes with a combat knife. Dario grabbed her, his grip hard, pulling her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "No," she gasped, her legs shaking. "Can you run?" She nodded. He pulled her toward a side exit, plunging back into the storm. They burst out onto the open, wet dockside, the wind whipping her hair across her face. They were safe. They were free. But as they stood there, panting, the sirens growing closer, the chasm of his accusation Mihai Tradito hung between them, as vast and cold as the dark water. The sirens converged on the dockside, but Dario's team had already vanished into the chaos of the container yard. Flint, moving with a brutal efficiency, steered Dario and Celia not to a car, but toward the central port operations tower, the glass and steel nerve center that overlooked the entire harbor. "If we are making a deal, we make it from the high ground," Dario said, his voice raw. He shoved Celia through the door, his hand on her back, protective. They were in the top-floor control room. Below them, the yard was a swirling sea of red and blue lights. Agent Pike's voice cut through the rain over a bullhorn. "Dario Lucchesi, this is the MCIS. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out." A new voice, wounded and furious, echoed from the warehouse they had just fled. "Costa, and he was on his own radio. He has the girl. He is in the tower." It was a true standoff, a three-way triangle of federal agents, a cornered rival, and the king of the port, Pike, realizing the situation was complex, changed tactics. "Lucchesi, I am coming up. Just me. We end this now." Moments later, Agent Pike stepped out of the elevator, his gun holstered but his hand resting on it. Dario and Flint stood on one side of the vast, dark control room. "This is a mess." "Dario," Pike said, his eyes darting to Celia. "It is a cleanup." Celia snapped, her voice shaking but defiant. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, holding the small, secure burner phone Dario had given her. "Before you arrest anyone, Agent Pike, you need to hear this." She pressed play. The room filled with the tinny, muffled audio she had recorded in the warehouse. Gabriele Costa's voice, arrogant and clear. "Bought his cousin for a few points. Lorenzo will give me the whole pier once she..." Then, his other voice. "Costa la vuole la ragazza che traduce per lui." The evidence was absolute, a clean confession. It implicated Costa. It proved Lorenzo's betrayal, and it established Celia as the target, not the accomplice. "The leak," Dario said, his voice lethally calm, "was not my translator. It was my blood." He spoke into his own earpiece. "Flint, Portalo, bring him." A side door opened, and Flint's men shoved a terrified, gagged Lorenzo Belanti into the room, throwing him to his knees. He had been captured hours ago. Immediately after Dario saw the surveillance video of the USB plant, Dario circled his cousin, his face unreadable. He ignored Pike. He ignored Celia. He spoke in the classical, formal Italian of his forefathers, a language of honor and iron. Tradimento, he said. The word heavy with history. Betrayal. You sold my name. You sold my schedules. You sold her. He crouched, forcing Lorenzo to meet his gaze. Hai un debito di sangue. You have a blood debt. Celia's breath hitched. She was watching the Mafia, not the businessman. This was the man who ruled the harbor, and he was about to execute his own family in front of the MCIS. Pike tensed, his hand gripping his weapon. But Dario did not move. He looked at Lorenzo's pathetic, weeping face. Then he looked at Celia, her eyes wide with terror, not at him, but for him. He saw the line. He stood up, the spell broken. He turned to Pike and shoved Lorenzo forward with his foot. He is yours, Dario said in English, his voice flat. He is your link to the Alba Nera. He is the one who fed them the information, the one who tried to burn my port down. Miss Ward, he put a heavy emphasis on her name, is the asset who uncovered the entire conspiracy. She is the one who helped you. She is your witness. Pike was stunned. This was a gift-wrapped federal case. It happened in a fraction of a second. Costa, having been brought up by Pike's men and left bleeding in a corner, saw his chance. With a guttural roar, he lunged, not at Dario but at Celia, a small ceramic blade he had hidden in his boot flashing in his hand. Dario did not think. He moved. He crossed the space in a single bound, shoving Celia behind him, shielding her body with his own. He did not even have time to raise his arms. The sound was a dull, wet thud, followed by a grunt of pure agony. Dario staggered back, clutching his side. Costa, his lunge spent, was tackled by Pike's men, but he was grinning. I still got him. Celia screamed, rushing to Dario, expecting to see a fatal wound. He was on one knee, breathing hard, but he looked at her, his eyes intense. Vest, he gasped, a thin, flexible armor vest beneath his shirt. The blade had not penetrated, but the force had been tremendous. He had taken a blade for her, proving to the entire MCIS what she meant to him. Pike stared. The entire complex truth laid bare. This was not about shipping lanes. He looked at Dario, winded but alive. He looked at Costa being cuffed. He looked at Celia, her hands on Dario's face. He nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. We have Costa, we have Belanti, Pike said, his voice official. We will prioritize the prosecution of the Alba Nera crew based on the courageous assistance of this civilian. The deal was struck. The Lucchesi file would go to the bottom of the pile as long as the violence stopped. The tension finally broke, and Celia, no longer a suspect, no longer bait, finally shattered. She leaned against the control panel, her legs giving out, and wept, deep, racking sobs of terror, relief, and the trauma of being accused by the one man who had seen her. Dario pulled her to him, his arms, his armor, still aching. He ignored Pike, ignored Flint, he just held her, his face buried in her hair, and whispered, his voice rough and only for her, in the language that was theirs. Quando ho dubitato di te, è stato il momento in cui ho odiato di più me stesso. When I doubted you. It was the moment I hated myself the most, but the truce was fragile. Pike had his villains. He could not, however, be seen letting the kingpin walk. I have my case, Dario, Pike said quietly, but you are still here, and I have 24 agents outside. I cannot just let you go. Dario understood. You will not have to, he said. He gave Flint a short, sharp order in Italian. 5 minutes later, a catastrophic explosion tore through the southern container yard. A preset charge on a stack of empty, condemned containers detonated, lighting up the night sky in a fireball. What the hell was that? Pike yelled, rushing to the window. Secondary attack, Flint yelled back. It must be Costa's men, trying to free him. Pike looked at the fire. He looked at Dario. He made his choice. All teams, move to the south yard, contain the fire. We have a perimeter breach. His agents scrambled, leaving the room, their focus diverted. Pike looked at Dario one last time. I've got a mess to clean up. He was giving him his exit. Pike grabbed Celia's arm, his grip firm. You are a material witness. Miss Ward, you're in my custody now. You're being moved to a protected location." "No," Celia cried, pulling back, looking at Dario. "Celia, vai," Dario commanded, his voice urgent. "Go. It is the only way this works. Go with him." The agents pulled her, protesting, into the elevator. She was escorted out of the tower, a rescued witness, and put into the back of a black federal sedan. As the car pulled away, she looked back. The operations tower was dark, but the south yard was an inferno. The news would report that Dario Lucchesi, caught in the blast set by his rivals, was presumed dead, lost in the flames. She watched the fire eat the sky, hollowed out, believing she had just watched the only man who mattered burn. 6 months. 6 months since the fire, since the sirens, since the name Dario Lucchesi was officially declared ash, lost in the inferno at the Port Leon docks. The federal witness reward, combined with a substantial anonymous wire transfer that appeared in her new government-issued bank account, had been enough to start over. Celia Ward no longer existed. In her place was C. Ward, the quiet proprietor of a small cafe in the snowy mountain town of Silverford, Pennsylvania. She had named the shop Piccola Luce, Little Light. It was a small, warm space that smelled of dark roast coffee and anise. Her life was quiet. She baked. She paid her bills. She was safe. Her mother was safe, too. Doctor. Elise Ward resided in a private, high-end care facility in the next county, a place with pastoral views and the best cardiac specialists. All her expenses, indefinitely, were covered by a generous grant from an anonymous arts and culture foundation that Celia knew was just a different, cleaner name for Dario's organization. Her mother was improving. Her health finally stabilized. Celia missed him with an ache that was physical. She kept his memory alive in small, secret rituals. She spoke Italian to the few European tourists who wandered in, just to feel the shape of his language. And in the quiet hours before closing, she would play old jazz vinyl, the same mournful, saxophone-heavy tracks that had filled the air at the blue docklight. It was a bitter December afternoon, the snow coming down in thick, fast-moving curtains. The bell above her door chimed, bringing in a blast of freezing air and a single customer. He stamped the snow from his heavy boots, his back to her. He wore a dark wool coat and a knit hat pulled low. When he turned, Celia's hands, which were polishing a glass, simply stopped. It was him, but different. His face was leaner, harder, and covered by a short, dark beard. He looked less like a boss and more like a man who had been traveling a long time. He did not smile. He just looked at her. His eyes the same intensity, the same depth, the same unreadable calculation that had, in the end, given way to raw emotion. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor. He was alive. The fire had been a performance, an exit strategy co-opted by Pike and executed by Flint. With Costa and Lorenzo in custody, Pike had his victory. The MCIS was happy to let the ghost of Dario Lucchesi stay a ghost. Celia did not cry. She did not run to him. The space between them was filled with 6 months of silence, of believing he was dead. He walked to the counter, his gaze drinking her in, as if to memorize her all over again in this new, peaceful setting. He stopped, close enough to touch, and spoke. His voice was a low rumble, rougher than she remembered, and he used the language that was theirs. "Sei ancora il mio porto," he whispered. "You are still my harbor." That was what broke her. A sound, half a sob, half a laugh, escaped her. The tears came then, blurring his face. "You are alive," she breathed. He explained it quickly. The Lucchesi Maritime Consortium still existed, but its face was different. Flint was running the day-to-day. The deal with Pike was being honored. Dario had cut away the dirty lines, the narcotics, the violence. He had kept his word. He was choosing the gray, less bloody path. He had chosen it. He said, "For her." "The kitchen," she said, her voice trembling. "Go to the kitchen," he nodded, understanding, and walked through the swinging door. She flipped the closed sign on the front door, locked it, and followed him. The kitchen was her true sanctuary. It was warm, messy, and smelled of yeast, vanilla, and hot coffee. It was a room with no cameras, no microphones, and no weapons. The moment she entered, he was on her. He did not grab her. He enfolded her. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his cold coat, his face burying in her hair. "Celia," he breathed, his voice thick. She clung to him, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her fingers digging into his shoulders, assuring herself he was real, solid. He was here. He kissed her. It was not the gentle exploration of the loft or the desperate claiming in the kitchen. It was a reunion. It was deep, starved, and full of the pain of 6 months of loss. His beard was rough against her skin, his lips warm and demanding. She met his kiss with equal force, her entire body shaking, breathing him in. It was a long, breathless moment of pure, overwhelming, and utterly safe passion. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, resting their foreheads against each other. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I am," he said. "Dario Lucchesi is, but I am here." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, the one thing, the one scar that had not healed. "The next time," she said, her voice gaining strength, "the next time you doubt me, Dario, before you judge me. You ask me. You ask me." He looked at her, and she saw the shame of that moment in the security room, a shadow he still carried. He nodded, his grip on her waist possessive, protective. He answered her, as he should in Italian. "La prossima volta," he vowed, "proteggerò sia te che la tua dignità." "Next time, I will protect both you and your dignity." A smile, the first real smile in 6 months, touched her lips. "Good." She glanced around the warm kitchen. "The apartment upstairs. It is empty. I just use it for storage. It is small, but—" "It is perfect," he said. "My mother," Celia said, the idea blooming. "She is stronger. We could move her here. She could be upstairs." "I will arrange the transport," he said, the old, commanding boss slipping through. "And you?" she asked. "The most important question. Will you stay? I have business in Port Leon," he admitted. "With my new identity, I can travel. Flint runs the port, but I will need a harbor." That night, the snow fell on a dark cafe. The Piccola Luce sign was off, outside. Silverford was silent and white, inside, in the darkness, on a worn-out fabric sofa near the front window. 2 people sat wrapped in a single blanket. They were not kissing. They were just together. He was telling her a story about Flint's disastrous attempt at diplomacy, his voice a low, amused rumble of Italian. She was laughing, her head resting on his chest, her hand flat over his heart, feeling it beat. The knots of the past, of suspicion and violence, had not been cut. They had been slowly, carefully, and together, undone. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it extra support by hitting the hype button so more people can hear it.